Do you really know who this is? They're hinting that something is fundamentally off, that Doom's identity is unstable, questionable, manufactured. And what better way to sell that than casting RDJ himself, a face we trust, a voice that defined heroism in the MCU, and twisting it. It's brilliant misdirection. You think you're seeing Iron Man return. You're not. You're seeing Doom pretending to be Iron Man. That's not nostalgia, that's manipulation. That's the plot. Now let's break that idea open, because this isn't just clever casting, this is narrative warfare. Doom using Tony Stark's face isn't about fan service. It's weaponized trust. In a multiverse ripped apart by betrayal and broken timelines, having Doom wear Tony's face is like putting poison in a wine glass labeled hope. It's a strategic illusion meant to throw off both the audience and the characters in universe. The Avengers see him, and some part of them wants to believe. And Doom knows that. He counts on that. Especially with characters like Peter Parker, who never got closure after Stark's death. Imagine Peter seeing that face again. That voice. That confidence. He would hesitate. And Doom knows how to exploit hesitation. And let's not forget the meta angle. Robert Downey Jr. is the MCU. His presence was the beating heart of the Infinity Saga. His exit in Endgame felt like the closing of an era. So when Marvel brings him back, it's not just plot, it's psychological warfare on the audience. You want to trust him, you want to cheer. But instead of redemption, you get deception. That's what makes this story hit so hard. It's not just about Dr. Doom rising, it's about legacy being hijacked. And nobody plays with legacy like Marvel does when they're operating at peak creativity. Now let's talk mechanics. The idea that Doom stole the consciousness of a multiversal Tony Stark isn't just intriguing, it's consistent with what we've seen Marvel already do. Remember, What If? Where consciousness was moved between universes, where Ultron achieved omnipotence through the Infinity Stones, where Strange Supreme literally devoured versions of himself to grow stronger. These aren't one-off experiments, they're blueprints. And when you consider that Victor Von Doom is arguably the most intelligent and dangerous man in the multiverse, it tracks completely that he wouldn't just build a multiversal empire, he would inhabit it. This also ties into that comic arc, infamous Iron Man, where Doom takes on the mantle of Iron Man after Tony's apparent death. But he doesn't just wear the suit, he tries to redeem himself. He tries to become a hero. The parallels here are terrifying, because in Doom's mind, he isn't a villain. He believes he's the only one who can save reality. He's not just playing Iron Man, he believes he's better than Iron Man. And if he has the power, the face, the legacy, then who's gonna stop him? And that's the scariest part, because RDJ doesn't need to be evil to play Doom. He just needs to believe he's right. That moral gray zone? That's where RDJ thrives. And when you stack that against what we're hearing about Avengers Doomsday, it all adds up. The multiverse is collapsing. Battleworld is forming. The TVA is in chaos. Loki is trapped in the void. Kang is fractured across timelines. The Avengers are splintered. And into that chaos steps a man who looks like the one they all used to follow. A man who speaks like Stark, strategizes like Stark, but acts like Doom. That's a mind bomb waiting to go off. The team's unity is already shaky. This will shatter it. And think about this. What better time for Doom to rise than now, when Kang, the original multiversal threat, is stumbling? Doom isn't just another big bad. He's opportunistic. He sees the holes in the system, the fractures in trust, and he slips in wearing a face everyone misses. That's how you conquer worlds, not with weapons, but with illusion. And let's not forget, Doom's ultimate goal is godhood. It's never been about ruling Latveria. It's always been about reshaping reality itself. And with Franklin Richards' powers, with Wanda's chaos magic, and with Tony Stark's legacy as a Trojan horse, Doom finally has the keys to rewrite the multiverse in his image. And this explains why Doom doesn't need to fight anyone head-on. He lets the Avengers and X-Men tear each other apart. He lets Monica get framed. He lets Spider-Man hesitate. He lets the TVA implode. Because while everyone is scrambling to decode the chaos, Doom is writing the next chapter. Quietly, methodically, wearing a face that disarms everyone in the room. This also reframes that moment from the Fantastic Four post-credits scene. Franklin Richards touches Doom's face, not in fear, but in recognition. And that's important, because Franklin is a cosmic-level being. He doesn't see just the surface. He sees energy, essence. And when he hesitates, it's because he feels something familiar. That's not Doom to him. That's someone else. Someone he's maybe dreamed of or met in another timeline. Maybe that's how he sees through the illusion. But by the time he realizes the truth, it's already too late. That's why the score matters. Doom? ? It's not confirmation. It's doubt. Because even in universe, nobody's sure what they're dealing with. Not Wanda, not Franklin, not the TVA, not even Strange. That's the twist. The villain isn't Doom or Stark. It's the loss of identity. The collapse of narrative. The rewriting of who's who in a world where faces lie and memories fail. And RDJ is the only one who can pull that off convincingly. Because his return doesn't feel like a villain arc, it feels like a comeback. That's the bait. Marvel knows that if they put that man on screen, fans will cheer, theaters will erupt, and everyone will emotionally invest before the reveal. Then they'll twist the knife. And that moment, that feeling of betrayal, isn't just a plot twist. It's the emotional core of Avengers Doomsday. Let's talk symbolism. Tony Stark began the MCU. He was the godfather of it all. What better way to mark the death of the multiverse than to pervert that origin? What better villain for the final saga than the literal ghost of the man who started it? And not just his ghost, his image, used as a mask by the most manipulative figure in Marvel history. That's the level of meta storytelling we're talking about here. Not just a twist, a statement. When you consider RDJ's cryptic social media posts, like the one with the quote, "new mask, same task," it's not random. It's code. It's narrative seed planting. Because if Doom is truly wearing Stark's face, metaphorically or literally, that 5-word sentence is the plot. He's not changing the mission. He's changing the face. And with that face, he gains access to everything. Stark's tech, Stark's alliances, Stark's legacy. He doesn't need armies, he needs belief. And this makes every rumor, every leak, every casting choice fall into place. RDJ isn't Doom. Doom is RDJ, which is not the same thing. It's a performance within a performance. A mask within a mask. A story about how power isn't just taken, it's inherited, stolen, impersonated. And in a multiverse, identity is the most unstable element of all. This answers another lingering question. Why would the Russo brothers say RDJ was the only one who could play this Doom? It's not because he's the best actor in the world, though he's great. It's because the story only works with him. This Doom requires emotional baggage. It requires audience trust. It requires nostalgia, charisma, and the weight of a decade of storytelling behind it. If Doom looked like anyone else, it wouldn't hit. But if Doom looks like Tony Stark, suddenly, everyone is vulnerable. That's how you shake a universe. Remember what Kevin Feige said recently. The multiverse saga is about choices, identity, and consequence. That's what this is. Doom choosing to become Stark. Identity being twisted into weaponry. Consequence unraveling everything that came before. It's not a twist for shock. It's a character study. And in that way, it's the darkest story Marvel has ever told. Because it's not about heroes versus villains. It's about the death of identity in a world where anyone can be anyone. That's why Robert Downey Jr. is not Dr. Doom. Not really. He's a version, a front, a perfect illusion. Doom is behind the curtain, inside the shell, pulling the strings. Stark is the skin he wears to get inside your head. Now let's talk about what this means for the multiverse as a whole. If Doom has indeed stolen the body of a Tony Stark variant, then we're looking at a villain who isn't just using science or sorcery, he's wielding legacy like a weapon. He's using trust as his superpower. In a world where every variant, every alternate version brings a new set of rules, Doom has chosen to play the most dangerous game of all. Not to conquer, but to replace. Not to appear as himself, but to appear as the person everyone wishes had never left. Tony Stark is the key to this entire multiverse narrative because he's the emotional core of every Avenger that came after him. And that's what Doom is stealing. Not just his face, not just his tech, but his meaning. This idea actually connects directly to Loki and the Citadel at the end of time. Think about it, the TVA was designed to prune variants, to preserve a sacred timeline. And what happened when He Who Remains lost control? The branches exploded. Timelines shattered. Now imagine what happens when Doom enters that system. He doesn't prune. He doesn't protect the sacred. He manipulates it. And not just from the outside like Kang. No, Doom's play is to go internal. He infiltrates by becoming the symbol of the sacred timeline itself. Stark. That's the infiltration of the century. And don't forget Loki's connection to this. He's sitting alone at the center of the timeline, watching it all unfold. And who do you think he's going to trust more? A multiversal council of broken heroes or a familiar face who tells him he understands the burden of protecting reality? That's the horror. Because even Loki, who's been down the road of deception, might hesitate when he sees RDJ's face. Doom doesn't have to fight for control. He just has to suggest that maybe he's already won. This is why the misdirection is so powerful. Fans think RDJ returning means hope, a second chance, a moment of redemption for the MCU. But Marvel's greatest trick isn't just bringing him back, it's redefining him. This isn't Tony Stark. This is the corruption of Tony Stark. It's Tony's face becoming the symbol of tyranny. And when that illusion finally shatters on screen, when the mask slips just a little, the emotional impact is going to be devastating. For the audience, for the characters, for everything the Avengers thought they knew. Now let's swing back to Franklin Richards. Why him? Why now? Franklin is arguably the most important character in this phase of the MCU, and nobody's really grasping how critical his role is. Because Franklin isn't just powerful. He's young. He's malleable. And Doom knows that. Just like how Wanda manipulated the twins in WandaVision, just like how Thanos manipulated Gamora and Nebula through trauma, Doom is using Franklin's vulnerability to his advantage. But not to raise him. Not to train him, to extract from him. Franklin is the source, the battery. The spark of chaos Doom needs to build Battleworld. And let's be clear, Battleworld isn't a battleground. It's Doom's dream. It's a Frankenstein patchwork of broken universes stitched together by stolen power. And what does Doom need to stitch reality? Franklin's Omega-level potential and Wanda's chaos magic. That's not a war strategy, that's a cosmic recipe. A new universe built in Doom's image, with himself as God at the center. And where is the Avengers during all this? Chasing ghosts, fighting each other, believing that maybe, just maybe, Tony came back to save them. Meanwhile, Doom is behind it all, orchestrating their downfall using the ultimate camouflage. That's not just evil. That's artistic. Now let's talk about Wanda, because her resurrection is not just a side quest. It's a cornerstone of Doom's plan. We've heard the rumors. She's alive, but her memory is gone. Why does that matter? Because memory is identity. And identity in this multiverse is everything. Doom doesn't want Wanda back because he needs a witch. He wants her back because he needs instability. Wanda's chaos magic doesn't just bend reality. It rejects reality. And that makes her the only being powerful enough to fuse shattered multiverses without destroying herself in the process. So Doom finds her, broken, amnesiac, and he becomes her savior. Not with threats, with kindness, with promises, with the voice of Tony Stark. And that's how he controls her. Because in a universe of lies, sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is offer someone hope. And this is where Spider-Man comes in. Because Spider-Man, more than any other character, feels the loss of Tony the most. He looked up to him. He built his identity around being the next Iron Man. And now, when he sees that face again, how do you think he'll react? He won't punch first. He won't run. He'll freeze. He'll ask questions. He'll hope. And that hesitation gives Doom everything he needs. Because even though Peter has grown, he still wants Tony back. And Doom knows that. And uses it. But that's not all. Because we know Spider-Man, Brand New Day ends with a post-credit scene where Doom appears. Not in armor, not in shadows, but in full view. As Tony Stark. And that's when everything snaps. Because up to that point, Peter's arc has been about rebuilding, finding his own way. And just when he's almost there, just when he's finally moved on, bam, here comes the lie, the illusion, the trap. From that moment on, the multiverse isn't just breaking, it's being remade. Because Doom doesn't just want to rule a broken world. He wants to build a perfect one. One where he's the hero. One where the face of Tony Stark is synonymous with salvation, not sacrifice. And we're not done yet. Let's revisit that West Coast Avengers comic RDJ posted, issue number 35. A child brainwashed into thinking he's Doom. That's Kristoff. But it's more than just a deep comic cut. It's the template. Because Kristoff represents the fragility of identity. The idea that if you're told long enough that you are someone, even if you're not, you become them. And isn't that exactly what Doom is doing? He's not just stealing Tony's body. He's becoming him. Slowly. Carefully. Completely. Which makes the final confrontation all the more terrifying. Because the moment Doom fully believes he is Stark, that's when he's most dangerous. Because now he's no longer pretending. He's convinced. And when a man like Doom is convinced he's the savior, that's when he becomes the destroyer. Now remember the empty Latverian seat at the UN. It wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was symbolic. Doom didn't show up because Doom is no longer tied to a single nation. He has moved beyond borders, beyond identity. He has become post-political. His war isn't for land, it's for reality itself. That empty seat isn't just a missing representative, it's a message. I don't answer to anyone anymore. And this brings us back to the idea that Doom doesn't have scars in this version. Why? Because the scars were always a metaphor. They represented the pain, the obsession, the pride. But now, he doesn't need them. The face he wears is flawless. It's beautiful. It's Tony Stark. And that perfection is part of the lie. The unscarred mask is what makes people trust him. It's what makes people follow. The scars are internal now, hidden, and that makes them more dangerous. So what happens when the mask comes off? When the Avengers realize too late that the man they trusted is the one who broke them apart? That's your doomsday moment. The multiverse doesn't collapse because of a weapon. It collapses because trust itself dies. The lie becomes too deep. The damage irreversible. That's why Robert Downey Jr. is not Dr. Doom. Because Dr. Doom isn't a man anymore. He's an idea, a lie, a virus that spreads through timelines by taking the shape of hope, of leadership, of Tony Stark. This isn't about returning to the status quo. It's about burning it down. It's about making the audience question everything they believe about the MCU. If RDJ can come back and play the villain, not by shouting, not by destroying cities, but by quietly stealing the soul of the MCU itself, then Marvel has done something incredible. They've turned nostalgia into horror, heroism into betrayal, and identity into warfare. So don't cheer when you see his face. Don't smile when you hear his voice. Ask yourself, who is he really? Because if you wait too long to figure it out, it might already be too late. Doom isn't coming. He's already here. And he's wearing the one face the universe can't say no to. And if you think that's where it ends, it doesn't. Because the way Marvel is structuring Avengers Doomsday, Secret Wars, and everything that spins out of it isn't just about good versus evil or heroes versus villains. It's about what happens when you lose the ability to tell the difference. And that's what Doom, using Tony Stark's face, does better than any threat we've seen in the MCU. Thanos wanted balance. Kang wants control. But Doom wants belief. He wants you to believe that he's the only way forward. And he wants that belief to come from the most manipulative place imaginable, grief. Because that's what Tony's death created. A void. An emotional black hole that every remaining hero still feels. It fractured Peter Parker. It pushed Rhodey into silence. It forced Strange into compromise. It broke Pepper's heart, left Morgan fatherless, and made the whole world question if any of it was worth it. So now when that face returns, when that voice says, "I'm here, I never really left," what happens? Some fall for it. Some resist. Some turn on each other. And that chaos is exactly what Doom thrives in. Doom's not stupid. He knows he can't defeat the Avengers by force, but he can defeat them by doubt. Because once you don't know who to trust, every move becomes compromised. Every plan becomes guesswork. That's the real Doomsday. Not a planet exploding. A trust collapse so complete that the greatest team in the multiverse can no longer function. And who causes it? A man wearing a familiar face and speaking familiar words, "I am Iron Man." That's what makes this storyline so powerful. Because it's not just a plot twist. It's a psychological implosion. Imagine Cap, or a new Cap, facing off against Doom and hesitating just long enough because of memories. Imagine Peter seeing Stark's face and faltering mid-fight. Imagine Bruce trying to stay rational while his friend's image is being weaponized. Even Fury, the man who trusts no one, would second-guess himself when he hears that cadence, that charisma, that conviction. Doom is playing chess on a board where everyone else is just hoping their past still matters. And the irony is, it doesn't. Because Doom doesn't want to destroy the multiverse. He wants to rewrite it. And that's worse. That's final. That's the point of Battleworld. It's Doom's curated timeline. His perfect kingdom. Built not just from fractured universes, but from lies. He takes what you love, what you trust, and reskins it with his image. It's not that he's pretending to be Stark. It's that he's showing the multiverse how easy it is to replace someone if you control the narrative. It's villainy as propaganda, and nobody's ready for it. Now here's where it gets even more insidious, and why this is such a meta stroke of genius. Because Marvel knows you, the audience, will second-guess yourself too. They know the second you see RDJ, your heart skips. Your nostalgia kicks in. Your emotions scream, "He's back," even before your brain catches up. And they're using that. They're counting on that. Just like Doom is. The viewer becomes a participant in the lie. And by the time the twist is revealed, you've been played just like the characters. If you want to know how this all explodes, look no further than Secret Wars. Because when the Avengers finally realize that Doom isn't Stark, that he never was, they'll want to take him down. But they'll be too late. Because he's already built his empire. He's already rewritten what's real and what isn't. He's already stolen the hearts and minds of a broken multiverse. And the only way to defeat him is to tear down everything that reminds them of Tony Stark. The towers, the suits, the legacy. That's the heartbreak. To defeat Doom, they have to erase their own history. And if that sounds harsh, good. It's supposed to be. This isn't a feel-good saga. This is the MCU growing up, evolving, asking harder questions. What is identity? What is memory? Can a legacy survive if it's used as a lie? That's the kind of story Doom as Stark lets them tell. And it's bold, risky, but exactly the kind of storytelling punch Marvel needs to reignite the fandom and carry this saga across the finish line. Now let's not ignore the Kang-sized elephant in the room. You might ask, where does Kang fit in if Doom is the final villain? And here's the answer. He doesn't. Not in the way you think. Because Kang may be fractured, splintered, and multiversal, but Doom is singular, focused, consuming. Kang is a virus that spreads. Doom is a singularity that absorbs. And the closer we get to Secret Wars, the more obvious it becomes. Kang is the distraction. Doom is the payoff. Think about the timeline. The TVA is spiraling. Kang variants are destabilizing. He who remains is gone. The council is broken. And into that vacuum walks a familiar silhouette, not with fear, but with confidence. Because Doom doesn't hide. He presents himself as the solution. The one who can end the Kang wars, seal the rifts, stabilize time. And when he says it with Tony Stark's face, everyone listens. That's what makes him scarier than Kang. He doesn't conquer with armies. He conquers with belief. Don't forget, Doom's ultimate enemy isn't the Avengers. It's Reed Richards. Always has been. And when you introduce the MCU's Reed, who knows Doom from before the armor, before the lies, that's when the real conflict explodes. Because Reed won't believe it's Tony. He'll see through the mask. He'll know who's behind the eyes. And he'll warn the others. But they won't listen. Because how do you tell someone not to trust the one person they wish was still alive? That's the kind of emotional tension that breaks teams apart. It's Civil War level conflict, but turned inward. Not about policy. About belief. Who do you believe? Who do you follow? Who do you see when you look at that man? And then there's Loki. Let's not forget that Loki is holding the threads of the multiverse in his hands. He understands time in a way nobody else does. And he's seen what happens when people worship false gods. Doom showing up wearing Tony's face will be the ultimate test for Loki's arc. Because he's not just fighting a villain, he's fighting the memory of a friend. Loki never cared much for Tony, but he respected him. And now, he's watching that face become the symbol of domination, of deception. That's the moment where Loki's redemption hits its final challenge. Will he burn the illusion down? Or will he play along? And then there's Strange, the man who's seen too much. Who broke the multiverse trying to save Peter Parker? Who watched Wanda tear reality apart and lived to tell the tale? He knows what chaos looks like. And when he sees Doom, masked or not, he'll feel it. But the challenge? He's been wrong before. His judgment is shaky. And Doom, using Stark's voice, will tempt even him. You want order? Doom will say. You want a universe where no child has to beg a wizard to erase time? He'll offer Strange everything he ever wanted. That's what Doom does. He doesn't just fight the heroes. He offers them what they secretly desire. Safety, order, meaning. He's the devil in Tony Stark's clothing. And that's the kind of villain who doesn't just win battles. He wins hearts, until the lie is too deep to undo. And that's why Robert Downey Jr. isn't playing Doom. Not really. He's playing a man who stole everything Tony Stark was and turned it into a lie. That's more powerful than any new armor, more dangerous than any new weapon. It's Doom, with charisma, with trust, with legacy. It's Doom, with a face the universe already loves. So next time you hear someone say RDJ is playing Dr. Doom, just stop and think, what if he's not Doom at all? What if Doom is using him the way a con artist uses a disguise? What if the return of Tony Stark is the bait, and Doom is the hook? Marvel's not just building a movie here. They're building a message that even your favorite heroes can be used against you. That nostalgia can blind you. That legacy, if corrupted, can become the most dangerous thing in the universe. And when the mask finally falls, when the Avengers realize what's been happening all along, it's not just a reveal. It's a reckoning. It's the moment where the multiverse doesn't break. It shatters. And that's why you're about to witness the darkest, boldest, most emotionally devastating story Marvel has ever told. Not because Doom is evil, but because Doom, using Tony's face, makes you forget what evil even looks like. Let's go back to the battle on Titan. You remember the chaos. Spider-Man darting through the air, Star-Lord losing control, Mantis struggling to restrain the mad Titan. But in the middle of this furious storm, something happened that most people overlook. When Iron Man faced Thanos one-on-one, Thanos didn't just see another Avenger. He paused. He looked directly at Tony, almost with recognition, and said the words, "The curse of knowledge isn't only yours." On the surface, this sounds like just another ominous Thanos line, but when you think deeper, you realize there's something off. Why single out Tony? Why speak about knowledge, about burden, about a curse? By this point, Thanos already had the Soul Stone and the Reality Stone. And if we know anything about the Soul Stone, it's that it reveals more than just souls. It's tied to destiny, to futures, to the deep essence of a person. Which means in that moment, Thanos wasn't just fighting Tony Stark, he was seeing what Tony Stark could become. And it terrified him. Now here's where it gets interesting. When Doctor Strange looked into the 14,605 futures, we were told there was only one where the Avengers actually won. But if you've watched carefully, you'll notice that statement never fully added up. Because later, in Multiverse of Madness, we see a completely different universe where the Illuminati defeated Thanos without much struggle. Which means Strange was not being entirely honest. He knew there were other paths where Thanos was stopped. But then why choose the path where Tony had to sacrifice himself? Why not one of the others? This is the heart of the theory. Strange didn't choose the one victory timeline. He chose the one timeline where Tony Stark would not survive. Because Strange had glimpsed the same terrifying future Thanos had, that if Tony lived, he would evolve, change, and ultimately transform into someone even darker than Thanos himself, Doctor Doom. Think about it. Tony Stark has all the qualities that could make Doctor Doom the most dangerous figure in the multiverse. Genius level intellect? Check. Mastery of technology that surpasses anyone else? Absolutely. A tendency toward arrogance, control, and believing his way is the only way. That's Tony Stark to the core. Doom in the comics is not just a sorcerer and scientist, he's a man who bends destiny, reshapes realities, and builds empires. Now ask yourself, doesn't that sound like the man who once built Ultron as a suit of armor around the world? Doesn't it sound like the man who tinkered endlessly because he couldn't let go of his mistakes? The seeds of doom were always in Tony, and both Strange and Thanos saw them sprouting. Let's pause for a second and revisit Thanos' perspective. His entire mission was about balance, about preventing universal collapse. We often focus on the brutality of his methods, wiping out half of existence, but we forget that Thanos thought of himself as a savior, someone burdened with the truth. Now picture him on Titan, armed with the Soul Stone, staring into the essence of Tony Stark. He sees not only the man in front of him, but the future that man could create. A future where Stark doesn't stop, doesn't rest, doesn't die. A future where his brilliance turns obsessive, where his inventions turn tyrannical, and where his fear of losing everything drives him to control everything. Thanos realized that if Stark survived, the universe wouldn't just face chaos. It would face a new Doom, a conqueror far worse than himself. So in that moment, when Thanos said the curse of knowledge wasn't only Tony's, it wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. Thanos was saying, I know the burden you carry, because I've seen it too. And this is why Doctor Strange's behavior makes more sense. Remember in Endgame, when the final battle was reaching its peak? Strange didn't directly tell Tony what to do. He simply held up one finger, the silent signal that this was the one way. But watch his face in that moment, right after Tony snaps. Everyone else is heartbroken, broken beyond words. Yet Strange's expression is calm, almost relieved. It's not the look of someone who's just seen a comrade fall. It's the look of someone whose long, impossible plan has finally succeeded. Because Strange didn't just secure a victory over Thanos. He secured a future where Tony Stark could never live long enough to become Doctor Doom. What's chilling is how this aligns both Strange and Thanos on a single point. Their methods were different, their goals seemingly opposed, but their recognition of Tony was the same. He was too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Thanos tried to kill him directly on Titan, but failed. Strange orchestrated a timeline where Tony would sacrifice himself, preserving his legacy as a hero, yes, but also making sure Doom never rose. It's almost poetic. Thanos and Strange, two figures who understood the burden of knowledge, converging on the same truth. Tony Stark must be stopped. And the only way to do it without destroying his soul was to let him die as the hero who saved everyone. Now, some of you might be wondering, if Strange knew this, why didn't he tell anyone? Why keep it a secret from the Avengers, from Tony himself? But that's exactly the point. You can't tell someone like Tony that his survival would lead to destruction. If you do, he'll fight it, resist it, and maybe even accelerate the path toward Doom out of fear. Strange had to play the long game. He had to maneuver events so that Tony made the choice himself, believing it was purely about saving the day. That's why Strange told him nothing, why he never revealed the other futures. It wasn't about preserving hope. It was about preserving necessity. The Avengers thought they were fighting Thanos, but in reality, they were unknowingly fighting against Tony's potential future as Doctor Doom. And let's not overlook the irony here. In the comics, Victor Von Doom is a master of both science and magic, a man who combines intellect with sorcery. And who in the MCU was on the path of bridging science and magic? Tony Stark, always side by side with Doctor Strange. Their dynamic wasn't just comic relief or ego clashes, it was foreshadowing. Strange wasn't just annoyed by Tony's arrogance. He was wary of it. He had seen where it could lead. And so the tension between them, the mistrust, the subtle digs, they were rooted in knowledge. Strange knew Tony's destiny could take him down the path of doom, and he couldn't let that happen. This recontextualizes everything. Tony's sacrifice wasn't just the end of his arc. It was the prevention of a darker arc we never got to see. His death wasn't only a triumph, it was a necessity. And when you look at the multiverse saga that Marvel is setting up with Kang and alternate versions of characters, the possibility becomes even more chilling. Because in those alternate universes, Tony Stark didn't die, he lived. And in some of those universes, the man who was once Iron Man became the man the multiverse fears the most, Doctor Doom. When we left off, I argued that Tony's sacrifice wasn't simply about saving the Avengers from Thanos. It was about saving the multiverse from Tony himself. But if that's true, then we have to dig deeper into the choices made by Doctor Strange. Strange is the chess master of the Infinity Saga, moving pieces across a board that no one else could even see. When he looked through the 14 million possibilities, he didn't just see battles. He saw legacies. He saw what happened when heroes lived past their supposed ending points. He saw the unintended consequences. And when it came to Tony Stark, Strange realized that victory wasn't victory unless Tony's story ended there. That's why he never looked panicked during the endgame battle. He had already seen the darkest version of Tony. The Tony who doesn't sacrifice. The Tony who survives long enough to become something far more terrifying. And if you notice carefully, Strange doesn't celebrate when Tony dies, he accepts it. Because he's known all along that this was the only way to protect reality itself. Now the question is, why Doom? Why does Tony, of all people, align so perfectly with the traits of Victor Von Doom? Let's consider what we know about Doom in the comics. Doom is not just a villain. He's often portrayed as someone who genuinely believes he is the only person capable of protecting the world. He sees chaos, he sees disorder, and he believes that only through his control can humanity survive. Isn't that exactly Tony Stark's mindset, even in his earliest appearances? Think back to Age of Ultron. Tony creates an AI to protect the Earth, a literal suit of armor around the world. He isn't thinking democratically. He isn't asking permission. He acts because he believes only he sees the bigger picture. That's Doom's thinking. And let's not forget the obsessive drive to fix his own mistakes. Doom wears a mask to cover his scars, refusing to ever let them define him. Tony wears armor, his own kind of mask, and spends his life compensating for his failures by building more and more technology. Doom tries to reshape the world through force. Tony does the same, only under the banner of protection. It's a fine line between protector and tyrant. And Strange knew that if Tony lived, eventually he'd cross it. We also need to factor in the influence of the Infinity Stones. Remember, Tony was the one who ultimately wielded them in Endgame. And we've seen how exposure to the stones can alter people. Wanda was transformed by the Mind Stone, her powers amplified to dangerous levels. The Tesseract reshaped Captain Marvel into a cosmic powerhouse. Even regular mortals who touched the Power Stone were obliterated instantly. Yet Tony, with his human body, bore the full weight of all 6 stones, if only for a moment. Imagine for a second if he had survived. The stones leave an imprint. They awaken possibilities. Strange probably saw what would happen if Tony absorbed even fragments of that power, if the knowledge of all 6 stones lingered in his mind. He wouldn't just return home to his family. He'd return with godlike insight. And with Tony's compulsive drive to protect, innovate, and control, that knowledge could easily transform him into someone unrecognizable. Not the hero we mourned, but the tyrant Strange feared. This is where the Soul Stone comes back into play. We know Thanos had it during the Titan battle, and the Soul Stone isn't like the others. It isn't about brute force or flashy visuals. It's about truth, the raw, unfiltered essence of a person. It shows what's hidden, the things even someone like Tony might not admit to himself. Thanos, with the Soul Stone, glimpsed the possibility of Tony's corruption. And that explains his strange connection to Stark in that battle. He wasn't just another enemy. He was the reflection of something Thanos understood all too well: burden, obsession, inevitability. That's why Thanos spared Tony's life on Titan after stabbing him. Most people assume it was random mercy. But what if it was recognition? What if Thanos realized Tony's destiny wasn't his to finish? That fate had bigger plans for Stark. Plans that only Strange could ensure reached their conclusion. To support this, let's look at Strange's specific choices in Infinity War. He makes a big show of saying he'll protect the Time Stone at all costs. He even tells Tony and Peter that he'd let them die rather than surrender it. But when the moment arrives, he does the opposite. He willingly hands it over to Thanos in exchange for Tony's life. At the time, this felt contradictory, but within this theory, it makes sense. Strange wasn't saving Tony because he believed in him. He was saving Tony because he needed him alive long enough to reach Endgame. He needed Tony to play his part in the one scenario where he would ultimately choose to sacrifice himself. Strange handing over the Time Stone wasn't a mistake. It was part of a larger design to guide Tony toward his own inevitable ending. Because without that moment, Tony never makes it to the final battlefield. And without the final battlefield, Tony never picks up the stones. And without the stones, he never dies. Strange orchestrated all of this, not to win a war, but to prevent Doom's rise. Now, let's expand into the multiverse saga, because this is where the implications become chilling. In What If? We've already seen Tony Stark variants who are far less heroic. In one universe, he's murdered by Killmonger because his arrogance blinds him. In another, Ultron succeeds, wiping out almost all life. And while these stories seem isolated, they point to a consistent pattern. Whenever Tony survives long enough, the world suffers. The multiverse doesn't fear Iron Man's sacrifice. It fears his survival. And if Marvel is building toward introducing Doctor Doom as the next great threat, what better twist than to reveal that Doom isn't just a new character? He's a multiversal destiny of Tony Stark himself. A Tony who lived, who learned too much, who refused to stop. Imagine the emotional weight of the Avengers facing Doom, only to realize he is Tony in another universe. The man they lost returned as the man they fear most. This also explains Strange's own later corruption in Multiverse of Madness. Remember, Strange himself is shown as vulnerable to becoming dangerous. The Illuminati's universe had a Strange who tampered with the Darkhold, believing he could control it, only to cause untold destruction. Strange understands the fine line between savior and monster because he's walked it himself. And so, when he looks at Tony, he doesn't just see an ally. He sees a reflection of his own possible failure, only amplified by Tony's genius and influence. Strange made the choice to eliminate his own dangerous variants across the multiverse. Why wouldn't he do the same with Tony, just more subtly? By guiding him towards sacrifice, Strange ensured the main universe never had to face the Iron Doom possibility. We should also revisit Pepper Potts and Morgan Stark here, because their existence adds another tragic layer. Tony's drive to protect wasn't just abstract, it was personal. He wanted a future for his daughter. He wanted stability for his family. And that desire, while noble, could have twisted him even faster into Doom territory had he survived. Doom in the comics often justifies his actions by claiming he's protecting Latveria, his people, his legacy. Tony's love for Morgan could have easily become justification for harsher control of the world around him. Imagine him, after Endgame, unable to rest, haunted by the knowledge of how fragile everything is, deciding that no one else is capable of protecting Morgan's future except him. That's not just Iron Man anymore. That's Doom in the making. Strange saw that possibility, and he closed it off the only way he could. And what about Kang? This is where things get truly fascinating. Kang is a villain obsessed with time, with pruning dangerous possibilities, with controlling the multiverse. But in some ways, Strange beat him to the punch. Strange pruned Tony Stark in the prime timeline. He made sure that this dangerous branch was cut before it ever grew. And if we think ahead, imagine King recognizing this truth. Imagine King acknowledging that Tony was the one potential rival who could have rivaled him in mastery of technology and multiversal power. Strange not only defeated Thanos' plan, he also indirectly removed King's greatest future competitor. That calm expression on his face in Endgame might not just have been relief. It might have been triumph, because Strange wasn't only saving his universe. He was protecting the multiverse from an Iron Doom that could have toppled even King himself. So when we connect all these threads, we see a picture forming. Thanos knew, Strange knew. Both recognized that Tony Stark carried within him the seeds of Doom, and both in their own ways acted to prevent it. Thanos tried to kill him directly, but fate intervened. Strange manipulated fate itself, creating the only scenario where Tony wouldn't live long enough to cross that line. And when Tony snapped his fingers, he wasn't just saving the world. He was saving it from himself. His sacrifice wasn't just a victory. It was containment. It was Strange closing the door on a doom that might otherwise have shattered the multiverse. And that's why, when Strange raises that single finger in Endgame, it isn't just about Thanos. It's about Tony. One way, one ending, one death. And only then could the universe truly be safe. If you followed Tony's arc from the very beginning, you'll notice something strange. The seeds of this darker destiny were planted right from his very first appearance in the MCU. In Iron Man 2008, Tony isn't portrayed as a selfless savior. He's arrogant, reckless, and most importantly, a man whose genius comes with consequences. His weapons devastate entire regions. His company thrives on destruction, and it takes a near-death experience to make him change direction. But here's the catch. Tony never truly escapes that original flaw. He doesn't stop building weapons. He just changes the packaging. His suits are weapons. Ultron is a weapon. Even his satellite-based AI system was designed for constant defense through constant aggression. Doom is written into his DNA. Doom begins not when a man wakes up one morning and decides to rule, but when a man convinces himself that only he can save everyone else. And that is Tony Stark's defining trait. From the cave in Afghanistan to the battlefield against Thanos, Tony is always trying to control the uncontrollable, because deep down, he never trusts anyone else to handle the weight. Now, let's examine some subtle foreshadowing moments sprinkled across the Infinity Saga. In Age of Ultron, Tony's dream sequence caused by Wanda is particularly haunting. He sees the Avengers dead, Earth destroyed, and himself standing helpless. This wasn't just a nightmare. It was a revelation. Tony's greatest fear wasn't just failure. It was losing control. It was being too late. And in trying to prevent that vision, he created Ultron, who nearly annihilated the world. If that's not a Doom-like pattern, I don't know what is. Doom also acts out of visions, out of his fear of inferiority, out of paranoia that only he sees the truth. This is why Strange's silence in Infinity War is so chilling. He knows Tony will never stop chasing this obsession. If allowed to live past Endgame, that obsession would lead him into the same territory as Doom. The belief that no sacrifice is too great if it secures the future he wants. Even Tony's language foreshadows this. Remember his line in Avengers 2012 when he tells Loki, "If we can't protect the Earth, you can be damn sure we'll avenge it." That sounds noble, but it's also uncompromising, almost threatening. Later in Civil War, he takes a stance on the Sokovia Accords that feels protective at first, oversight, responsibility, but quickly turns authoritarian. He's willing to hunt down Steve Rogers, one of his closest allies, in the name of control. Doom operates in that same paradox. Protect the people, but strip them of choice. Keep them safe, but deny them freedom. The MCU was never shy about painting Tony as morally gray, but what if that wasn't just character nuance? What if it was a breadcrumb trail leading us to realize why Strange had to stop him? Because if the Avengers fractured over the Sokovia Accords, imagine what would happen if Tony survived Endgame with the power of the stones echoing in his head. He wouldn't just regulate, he'd dominate. And then there's the iconic line, "I am Iron Man." We celebrate it as a declaration of identity, but think about the dual meaning. Doom 2 is defined by identity. He doesn't hide behind masks as weakness. He declares, "I am Doom," as if his very existence is destiny. For Tony, "I am Iron Man" is both triumph and curse. Every time he says it, it's a reminder that he cannot escape what he is, a man defined by his creations, by his power, by his control. In Endgame, that line was his final act. But imagine him saying it again in a universe where he survives. Would it still sound heroic, or would it start to sound like the mantra of a tyrant? Strange didn't take that risk. He made sure Tony's last "I am Iron Man" closed the book permanently. Let's not forget the symbolism of Tony's arc reactor. From the very beginning, his heart was powered by artificial means. It was both a source of life and a reminder of fragility. Doom 2 hides his vulnerabilities beneath layers of technology and armor. Both men are, in essence, prisoners of their own genius. And there's a moment in Iron Man 2 where Tony is literally poisoning himself with palladium, slowly dying from the very device keeping him alive. Isn't that exactly the trajectory Doom follows? Sustained by his brilliance, destroyed by it. The MCU may not have introduced Doom yet, but through Tony, they gave us a preview of what he represents. The genius who cannot stop, who cannot rest, and who ultimately destroys himself and others in the pursuit of control. Now, why does this matter for the multiverse saga? Because Marvel has already hinted at the dangers of alternate versions of beloved characters. Loki introduced us to variants, some heroic, some catastrophic. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness showed us a Strange whose pursuit of knowledge doomed entire universes. And What If showed us how small shifts in choice turn heroes into villains. In one episode, Strange absorbs dark entities until he destroys his own universe. In another, Tony's arrogance leads him into alliances that cost him his life. Each of these stories is pointing at a truth. Survival doesn't always mean salvation. Sometimes, survival is the worst-case scenario. And if you take that logic back to Tony Stark, his death wasn't just sad, it was merciful. Because in the multiverse where he lives, the world eventually faces doom. Think too about the MCU's obsession with legacy. Steve Rogers passed his shield. Thor passed leadership to Valkyrie. Black Panther left a kingdom behind. Every hero leaves something that others can carry forward. But Tony's legacy, it's dangerous. It's technology, weapons, suits, algorithms. Even his daughter Morgan, if she were to inherit his genius, would be inheriting not just brilliance, but burden. Doom is as much a legacy as it is a man. If Tony survives, Doom's ideology survives with him, reshaping the world in ways that would echo for generations. Strange wasn't just preventing one man's corruption. He was cutting off a legacy before it could metastasize into something uncontrollable. And here's something that gets overlooked. Strange's role as Sorcerer Supreme isn't just about defending the universe from mystical threats. It's about balance. It's about pruning dangerous futures before they manifest. That's exactly what he did with Tony. His manipulation of the timeline wasn't cruelty. It was duty. In his eyes, guiding Tony towards sacrifice was the most merciful path available. And that's why his expression in Endgame is calm. It's not that he's happy Tony died. It's that he's relieved Tony didn't live. Because Strange knows what we now realize, Doom is Tony Stark unpruned. Doom is Tony Stark unchecked. Doom is Tony Stark, with no one left to stop him. This also gives a new dimension to Thanos' philosophy. People mock him for his obsession with balance, for his belief that the universe must be cold. But maybe Thanos, like Strange, understood a deeper truth. Unchecked genius, unchecked power is the real threat. He may have seen Tony as the embodiment of that. And perhaps, in some twisted way, Thanos and Strange are two sides of the same coin. Both sought to protect the universe. Both foresaw Tony's potential, and both acted in ways that cost countless lives. The difference is, Thanos embraced destruction, while Strange embraced sacrifice. But the end goal was similar: keep Doom from rising. The brilliance of this theory is how it reframes the Infinity Saga. For years, we've celebrated Tony's death as the ultimate act of selflessness. And yes, it was. But it was also strategic. It was the moment Strange ensured the multiverse's survival, not just from Thanos, but from Tony Stark himself. And as Marvel builds toward introducing Doom, this twist could become the reveal that shocks everyone. Doom isn't just coming. Doom has already been foreshadowed through Tony. Doom is the destiny Tony avoided by dying, but one that other universes weren't so lucky to escape. And when the Avengers eventually face Doom, they won't just be fighting another villain. They'll be fighting the man Tony could have become. We've now seen how Strange and Thanos both recognized Tony's potential to become Doom, and how Tony's death was the only way to protect the main MCU timeline. But let's zoom out further. The multiverse saga isn't just about introducing new villains, it's about showing how the choices of our heroes ripple across infinite worlds. Kang represents time, Doom represents destiny, and when you combine those two forces, Tony Stark becomes the perfect bridge between them. Strange prevented Doom in our universe, but the multiverse isn't so lucky. Somewhere out there, another Tony didn't die. Another Tony survived Endgame. And that survival set the stage for the rise of Doom. When Marvel eventually reveals Doom in the MCU, it won't be random. It will be personal. It will be a reminder that the greatest threat isn't an outsider. It's a reflection of the hero who once saved everyone. To really grasp this, let's look at Kang's philosophy. Kang is obsessed with pruning dangerous timelines, with ensuring no variant threatens his own supremacy. He sees time itself as fragile, needing constant correction. Now imagine Kang's awareness of Tony Stark. Across the multiverse, Tony is a wild card. In some universes, he dies as a hero. In others, he becomes corrupted. In still others, he creates disasters that spiral out of control. For Kang, Tony is unpredictable, a dangerous variable. And yet even Kang doesn't have full control over every variant. That's where Doom becomes terrifying. Doom, especially if rooted in Tony Stark, is not just another variant to prune. He's a rival genius who can outthink Kang, outbuild Kang, and perhaps even overthrow him. Strange in killing Tony's possibility in the main universe might have been saving not just Earth, but all timelines from an inevitable clash between Kang and Doom. And Kang, when he eventually recognizes this, might see Strange as the only man who truly understood the stakes. Let's also consider Morgan Stark here, because she's more important to this theory than most people realize. Tony's love for his daughter was his final tether to humanity, his anchor. But anchors can become obsessions. Doom's motivation in the comics often stems from protecting Latveria, his homeland, his people. He justifies tyranny by calling it love. Now imagine Tony surviving Endgame. He'd look at Morgan and see her as the reason to do everything, to control everything. He wouldn't just be a father. He'd be the father of destiny, the man who would rewrite the world so that his daughter's future could never be threatened. That's not selflessness. That's obsession. And Strange, glimpsing those futures, knew that Tony's survival would transform him into something unrecognizable. A man who loved too much, controlled too tightly, and became Doom in the process. And then there are the variants. Marvel has already teased us with glimpses of alternate Iron Men. In What If? We see a Tony who's reckless, a Tony who dies early, a Tony who aligns with Killmonger. Each variant highlights one truth. Tony's destiny isn't fixed. He isn't guaranteed to be a hero. He's always teetering on the edge. And that edge is exactly what makes Doom possible. Imagine, in one universe, a Tony who survives the snap, but who can't let go of the stone's knowledge. He starts building, experimenting, pushing technology and reality itself further than anyone should. Over time, that obsession hardens. The armor becomes more permanent. The compassion fades. And one day, he no longer calls himself Iron Man. He calls himself Doom. That reveal would shake the MCU because it's not just a villain's origin, it's the corruption of the man audiences loved most. Marvel has been seeding this idea more subtly than we think. In Spider-Man: Far From Home, we see the world mourning Tony. Murals, graffiti, news broadcasts praising him as the ultimate hero. But what happens when that narrative flips? What happens when a multiversal variant emerges not as a savior, but as a conqueror? The dissonance would be devastating for Peter Parker, who idolized Tony. It would be shattering for Pepper and Morgan, who would see the man they loved mirrored as a tyrant. And it would be haunting for Strange, who knew all along this was possible. The emotional impact of Doom being Tony, or at least a Tony, would be unlike anything Marvel has done before. It wouldn't just be a villain to punch. It would be a villain who forces every character to ask, How close were we to this happening in our world? Another crucial layer here is technology versus magic. Doom in the comics isn't limited to science. He masters sorcery as well. Tony Stark, of course, is the face of science in the MCU. Strange, meanwhile, represents magic. And their interactions in Infinity War and Endgame are often combative. But what if that wasn't just ego? What if it was foreshadowing? Strange knew that Tony's curiosity, his relentless need to understand, would eventually push him toward magic as well. And imagine Tony with mastery of both technology and mysticism. That's not just Iron Man 2.0. That's Doom. Strange's unease around Tony wasn't about personality clashes. It was about knowledge of what Tony could become. That's why Strange's silence, his choice not to explain, makes sense. He couldn't tell Tony he might become Doom. He had to let him die a hero. And here's where Kang's threat and Doom's threat intersect. Kang controls timelines. Doom controls destinies. Kang is an overseer. Doom is a ruler. If Marvel positions Doom as a Tony Stark variant, the stakes become existential. Kang represents the multiverse's external order. Doom represents its internal corruption. And the Avengers, or whatever new team rises, won't just be fighting villains anymore. They'll be fighting the consequences of their own fallen hero. Strange's role in all of this becomes even clearer. He didn't just save the multiverse from Thanos. He set the stage for the multiverse's next great war. A war where Tony's shadow looms over every universe because in one form or another, Doom was always inside him. So when we think about Tony's sacrifice, we need to stop viewing it only as an emotional climax. It was also a structural necessity. The story demanded that Tony die because Marvel's larger saga demanded it. His survival would have broken everything. And as we look ahead to Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, it's easy to see how Marvel could play this card. Imagine the moment when the heroes discover that Doom is not just some scientist from Latveria, but a Tony Stark from another universe who lived past his breaking point. That reveal would collapse everything the audience thought they knew. It would connect the Infinity Saga directly into the Multiverse saga, making Tony's death not just the end of one story, but the pivot into the next. And it would cement Strange as the only character who saw it coming. That's why Thanos' line on Titan becomes the most haunting piece of foreshadowing in the entire Infinity Saga. The curse of knowledge isn't only yours. He wasn't just sympathizing. He was warning. He saw the doom inside Tony. He knew the multiverse's greatest threat wasn't himself, but the man in the armor. And Strange silently knew the same. Together, in their own twisted ways, they made sure that Doom would never rise in our timeline. But the multiverse? That's another story. And that story is just beginning. Everything we've uncovered leads us here. The climax of this entire theory. We've talked about Thanos seeing Tony's soul with the help of the Soul Stone. We've dissected Strange's hidden motives in orchestrating the one scenario where Tony had to die. We've looked at Tony's flaws, his similarities with Victor Von Doom, and the dangerous potential of his survival. But now let's step back and assemble the big picture. The Infinity Saga wasn't just about defeating Thanos. It wasn't even about Tony becoming a hero. It was about pruning a future, closing off the path that would have given birth to Doom in the MCU's prime timeline. Every choice, every moment, every sacrifice builds toward this revelation. Tony Stark's death wasn't just a necessity to stop Thanos. It was a necessity to stop Tony Stark himself. Think about the symmetry here. The Infinity Saga begins with Tony creating destruction through his weapons, a man whose genius puts the world at risk. And it ends with Tony creating salvation through his sacrifice, a man whose genius saves the universe. That full circle arc feels complete, but only because Strange ensured it would be complete. Without Strange's guidance, the story might have ended differently. Tony could have lived. Tony could have rebuilt. Tony could have spiraled. And what we know from Marvel's multiverse storytelling is that this isn't speculation. It's canon. In What If? And we've seen universes where Tony's choices destroy entire realities. In Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, we've seen how the wrong decision can unravel existence itself. Tony's arc isn't just an inspiring hero's journey. It's a tightrope walk over an abyss, and Strange was the one making sure he fell on the right side. And here's what makes the theory so compelling. Both Thanos and Strange acted out of knowledge, not malice. Thanos, when he said, "The curse of knowledge isn't only yours," wasn't mocking Tony. He was admitting that he too had seen the burden of possibility. With the Soul Stone, he glimpsed Tony's destiny, the rise of doom. Strange, using the Time Stone, glimpsed the same. Two enemies, diametrically opposed, yet united by one truth. Tony Stark must not live past Endgame. And that's why Strange looked calm while everyone else cried. That's why Thanos spared Tony's life on Titan, knowing the timeline would take care of him later. Strange and Thanos, in their own twisted way, agreed on one thing. Tony's life was too dangerous to continue. Now consider how this reframes the multiverse saga. Marvel isn't introducing Kang and Doom at random. They're building a hierarchy of threats. Kang represents the external threat, time, order, pruning timelines. Doom represents the internal threat, corruption, obsession, the fall of a savior. And when the heroes eventually face Doom, it won't just be about defeating a new villain. It will be about confronting the dark reflection of Tony Stark, the man they thought they knew. Imagine the emotional weight. Peter Parker seeing his mentor returned as a tyrant. Strange realizing the very future he tried to prevent has found another way to exist. Morgan Stark learning that in another universe, her father didn't die a hero, he lived long enough to become the monster. Doom won't just be terrifying because of his power. He'll be terrifying because of his familiarity. He'll be Tony Stark unpruned. This also explains why Strange has become such a central figure in the multiverse saga. He isn't just the Sorcerer Supreme. He's the multiverse's guardian of possibility. In Multiverse of Madness, we saw the cost of his own corruption. He understands how thin the line is between hero and villain. That's why his awareness of Tony's potential was so crucial. Strange didn't just guide Tony to victory. He guided him to an ending. He pruned a dangerous branch of destiny. And now as the multiverse opens, Strange will likely face the consequence of that choice. Doom's arrival, especially if he is revealed as a Tony Stark variant, would prove that you can't prune every possibility. You can close one path, but another will always grow in the multiverse. Strange's satisfaction in Endgame may have been temporary, but his battle with Doom will be personal. He'll face the man he once saved, or rather the man he once killed through fate. And here's the haunting beauty of Tony's arc when seen through this lens. His death becomes more than sacrifice. It becomes salvation from himself. Tony was spared from becoming Doom. He was spared from a destiny where his love for his daughter twisted into obsession, where his genius turned into tyranny, where his identity as Iron Man consumed him. Strange didn't just help him die a hero. He helped him avoid dying a monster. And that's why his ending feels so bittersweet. We cried because we lost him, but what we didn't realize is that we should also be relieved. Tony's death was the best possible ending, not just for the Avengers, but for Tony Stark himself. So when Doom finally arrives in the MCU, think about the weight that reveal will carry. Doom won't just be a conqueror from Latveria. He'll be a living what if. The Tony Stark who didn't snap, the Tony Stark who didn't die, the Tony Stark Strange was terrified of. It will retroactively make the Infinity Saga even richer, because we'll realize that the stakes weren't just about saving the world from Thanos. They were about saving the multiverse from Tony. And Marvel in its storytelling brilliance, planted the clues all along. Thanos' line on Titan, Strange's finger in Endgame, Tony's obsession in Age of Ultron, the Sokovia Accords, the Ultron failure, the arc reactor. Every piece fits together when you accept the theory that Tony Stark was always destined to become Doom, unless he didn't survive.